It's time to take a ride on the Steelers Afternoon Drive with our co-hosts, Alan Saunders and Zachary Smith.
Welcome back to another episode of Steelers Afternoon Drive. I'm Zachary Smith. That is Alan Saunders. Alan, how we feeling?
I'm good, man. I'm good. I still don't know what day it is, but other than that, I'm good.
Well,
It was Tomlin.
okay, so,
No, it's Mike Monday. It's Mike Monday ahead of a Saturday game. Got that sorted out.
That's kind of where I wanted to start with this because this time yesterday, didn't know that was happening. We still got the second slate of games going on, and I'm as well. I kind of just assumed, hey, this is going to be a 1 o'clock Sunday game, kind of along with, the Ravens and Browns also playing in that slate, as well as Denver, Kansas City. Like I kind of just thought they would all be within that same vein. But no, Saturday 8 p.m. following Ravens and Browns taking place at 4:30. Anything on that, I guess, before we dive into more stuff? I know that you said you were surprised there, but a lot of the players, at least one that I spoke to this morning, very upset about this. Went to sleep last night not knowing this was going to be the case, understanding on the back end now they're going to have the extra day. But I think it's just like, again, this was going to happen to a couple teams, but most of those guys are probably sleeping last night, and then they wake up this morning to find out that they play a day earlier.
Yeah, I mean, that the week-to-week part of the schedule sucks, but like the Ravens are the team that's getting screwed here because the fact that if they're going to play at different times and the Ravens having to have to go first, they're definitely the team that is the most disadvantaged. The Steelers, it is what it is. I don't think it harms them in any way. Obviously, like they could have announced that at like 4 though yesterday, or like 8. Like why do they have to wait until after an NFC game? I don't know why it mattered.
Yeah.
But I had assumed it was going to be a 1 because they would want the Steelers and the Ravens to be playing at the same time. That's fair. I think this is unfair that the Steelers will know that whether or not they'll have the division up for grabs when they play. Not that I really think Mike Tomlin would rest players anyway, but like it just matters about like how, like, okay, the last 2 weeks the Steelers have been losing late in games, and they've kind of like, I don't want to say mailed it in, but they've kind of chosen, the sort
accepted
of
defeat.
Yeah, right. Like you kind of need to know how hard you need to try based on how much the game means, and the Steelers are going to know that, and the Ravens aren't. Like, and so like even if the games were happening at the same time, like you would get some information, right? You would go into that like the end of the game knowing what's happening in the other game. Like the Ravens are really the team that is getting screwed here. The Steelers, I mean, how much of a difference is there between Saturday at 8 p.m. and Sunday at 1 p.m. in terms of preparation? Like, not that much.
Yeah, I was told it changes.
I'd much rather play Saturday night than Sunday night because then you're playing on the short week going into the wild card. Like that's way better.
Absolutely. What it was said to me was it changes the week, like it changes the days around. So with Mike talking on Monday, I think that plays into that as well.
Yeah, he was going to talk tomorrow. Yeah, for sure. And that all changed at like 11:30 p. No, actually, like 11:30 p.m. last night. All that changed.
Yeah, so for players that like are asleep already at that time, they wake up this morning. I'm like, all of a sudden your day completely changes with the day being shifted up a day. But the first thing that I want to talk about, actually, I guess kind of continuation on there. You said
wait. Before we go somewhere else, I wanted to. So I put on Twitter last night. I was like, I don't understand. There were a lot of complaints. Like people didn't like the change, or it wasn't a change, but this game being Saturday night. And I said I don't really get that. Like the Steelers are getting an edge here, even if it's a small one. But I had some people respond to me just as fans that they don't like night games. Now it's funny because I cover college football, where there's like an ongoing revolt in college football about fans not liking noon games, and so it was very strange to me to hear that fans say they don't like night games. As someone who is a fan and pays for his tickets and sits there. Win, loss, whatever. Do you dislike night games? What's your take on this?
It feels bigger. Like I mean, in prime time, like it feels like a bigger game. I enjoy the atmosphere more, and I don't even know how you could categorize this one into the same thing because this is a Saturday night. Like it's like a Sunday night, maybe Monday night, Thursday night. You got to go to work the next day. So like, I kind of get it if you work like a normal 9 to 5 and you're waking up the next day on a Saturday night. What else? What do you got going on Sunday morning that you're upset about them playing on a Saturday night? I like this, to be honest with you, from that perspective.
Yeah. Okay. I wanted to get your take on that because I was like, this seems perfect to me. Like, for me as a fan, I'd much rather go to a night game than a day game. It does feel like a bigger deal. And you get a little more lead-in time. I know this isn't a thing for you, but for some of us that like to enjoy our beverages, a couple extra hours, that's nice. You don't have to in.
I actually I remember I put this out there a while too. Like I did like a ranking of my favorite time slots and stuff like that. I actually kind of like being in that middle. Like not that the Steelers host a ton of those games, but like the 4 o'clock-ish slate on a Sunday.
Yeah, those are solid.
Because you don't have to wake up super early to get down there or anything like that, but you're also not getting home super late. So I just think it's a nice spot to be in. But again, Steelers don't really host a ton of that in that slot.
Yeah. But I don't know. I mean, I feel like 1 p.m. Sunday is fine, but like I don't think they all have to be there. I just feel like some people like to complain.
Yeah. And so from a Cincinnati standpoint, I saw a lot of people about this. This is their 5th road primetime game, which is pretty insane. It's the most ever. Wow. So yeah, pretty insane. And 2 of them have been flexed into that. So pretty insane.
That's kind of, and I thought the Steelers and the Bengals were gonna get flexed into primetime earlier, and they didn't. And now this one ends up in primetime.
Yeah. You mentioned you didn't think that they were going to operate differently. I know Tomlin said that today. To you, though, somebody actually DM'd me asking me about this. We were having a bit of a conversation. Would playing, and I don't know how the organization's going to look at it, but would being the 5 seed potentially going to Houston as opposed to the 6 seed going to Baltimore be enough for you to operate differently? Or do you think they should just operate the same way regardless, assuming that they know in advance, like Baltimore has won that game against Cleveland? And regardless, like Tomlin said, he's not going to sit starters or whatever, but like from your perspective, is it worth being the 5 seed as opposed to the 6 or not really? Doesn't matter.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a good bit to be said for one in general being the 5 seed instead of the 6 seed. It does still give you the possibility of playing a home game in the second round. It also gives you the possibility if somebody upsets the Bills of dodging one of those top 2 seeds. And so I think I would rather not be the 6 seed if possible. Also just think Baltimore is a significantly more difficult opponent than Houston is. And so feel like that's may not be a better specific matchup for the Steelers, but it's just a better, Baltimore's a better team. I would not hold anybody out of that game except for maybe like a guy like Joey Porter coming back from injury. Seems like he's right at the sort of leading edge of the injury timeline there. And a guy would be super important to you in the playoffs. Like that would be maybe the only kind of decision I would make is to say, okay, maybe give him one more week now that we know the division is off the table. Obviously, the home game and being the 3 seed is a huge difference. There isn't that big of a difference in the 5 seed and the 6 seed. And you also aren't even guaranteed to need to win that game. Not that I think the Raiders are going to beat the Chargers, but it's not like it's 100% either. Like you can lose and still get the 5 seed.
Raiders, I mean, still last couple of weeks, the Raiders have played some pretty decent ball. Pretty clearly, they're not mailing it in. At the very least, you could say that. So, puncher's chance for them to upset the Chargers. But yeah, I mean, I see the value in being the 5 as opposed to the 6, both short term and long term. Obviously, you mentioned like the first round opponent being Houston, who's kind of like limping their way into the postseason as well. Very clearly, the weakest of the division winners. But also, like you mentioned, if you get the Harbaughs playing each other round 2 and you can get Jim to upset John and some other stuff happens like down the road, who's to say they don't give themselves at least a chance to host a home playoff? Because I think they should be trying to be the highest seed possible. So yeah, I wouldn't be sitting guys and just kind of take it for granted and hope that you end up being the 5 seed if the Chargers lose and maybe fall into the 6. Like I think they should be going out there trying to win this football game.
And I think the other part of this is like I might have a different opinion if the Steelers were not on a 3-game losing streak of 2-score losses. Like, it's one thing if you're just coasting into the playoffs playing well. Like, there's a real need for them to show some solutions to the problems that have been presented over the last 3 weeks, and this is an opportunity to do it. Now, and you can't really do that if you don't play your guys. Can you, like, let's say the game gets out of hand one way or another in the first half. Let's say either way, this is a 2-touchdown game at halftime. Okay, maybe I'm into some backups at that point, but like, I think you got to go into this game and attempt to solve some of the problems we've had the last 3 weeks, whether it means anything or not. Like, even if the Steelers were totally locked into a seed, I think given the way they've been playing, they're better off going out there and doing the job, at least for some of the game, just to prove that they can do it.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I agree. So interesting that you mentioned that, because that's kind of where I want to go now. Dive into some stuff from Mike Tomlin. It was a Mike Monday, not a Tomlin Tuesday, as we said. First thing, want to talk about injured players. You just mentioned Joey Porter Jr., potentially somebody to hold out. But, what did Mike have to say about the availability of him, Ben Skoranek, Justin Fields? The guys were still waiting to get back.
Yeah, he gave it sort of thumbs up on all those guys. Fields, Porter, Skoranek. I talked to Ben Skoranek very briefly. Said, he was actually a little more hesitant, a little more cautious than Tomlin was in terms of him being back. But he said, that the plan is to go out there and try it this week and see what happens. Tomlin did say that Corey Trice and Jalen Warren were banged up and may miss time at the start of the week. Not what you want to hear about either of those guys. Warren's been banged up so much this year and had been playing his best football. Trice just seems like he's always hurt. And so, not great news there, but if they're not going to miss the game, I guess it doesn't matter that much, but something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially because, we talked about Corey Trice, maybe a bit of a bright spot during this losing streak where you're looking for them. I thought that he's bounced back pretty nicely after a rough game. So especially against the Chiefs there. So definitely stuff to monitor, but hopefully green light for all those guys. Something else that I wanted, you mentioned the problems that they've had over the last few weeks and how we got to this point and kind of limping right now, potentially into the postseason. And that's why you should have guys in this one going. I know that Tomlin wanted to talk about getting players on the same page. He's obviously going to have answer questions about those. If the players are bringing up it themselves in post game, it's of course going to be asked the head coach. What was his response to that? Did he voice any displeasure with it getting out of house and not being kept in house, or kind of how was the approach to that taken?
I don't. He didn't displace any displeasure. Actually, he kind of said like they're bickering because they care, and that's a good thing. It would be bad if they didn't care that these things were happening. And then he's basically said he essentially locked them in a room on Thursday and said, figure it out. That, he called them in. I know some players were expressing before the game a thought that they might be off the day after Christmas, after playing on Christmas. And then they were not off, and they came in for meetings. And basically Tomlin said, I give them information, but I made them hash it out in terms of figuring out what's been going on with the defense and the issues and the issues that have led to guys saying.
Is this the entire defense or just the secondary, or like who we talking about?
I think that's the whole defense. I mean, I didn't get any specifics, but usually they meet as units in those days after games. And so, I think there's seemed like the message got across. Talked to Patrick Queen and Alex Highsmith today. Those guys, said it was a really productive meeting. Miscommunication is really the wrong word. A lot of it is like hero ball. A lot of it is guys not trusting other guys to make the play. A lot of it is thinking they can do more than they actually can. And so I think the real thing is they've got to come together and trust each other. It feels good to say it. I don't know that I'm going to believe it until I see them do it. Again, going back to the previous discussion of why I think it's important for their starters to play in this game.
Well, and this is a heck of a test. I mean, say what you will about Cincinnati overall, and they're still alive for a playoff berth, but specifically this passing game, we know how explosive they are and what they can do. They're going to test whether or not these issues for the Steelers on the back end have been resolved.
I mean, there's nobody better to test your secondary issues than the Cincinatti Bengals right now. Like, period. Like they're the best.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think we're gonna find out very quickly what's working and what's not. I mean, now have Joey Porter back, so that'll kind of eliminate the last of the sort of personnel issues they've had when they dealt with Deshaun Elliott being out and Minka playing out of position and Dante Jackson being banged up. Like, they'll have a full boat here for this game. So no more excuses.
Do you anticipate any changes taking place? Because I know you said not miscommunication might be the wrong word. Guys trying to play hero ball. I mean, if you see the clips, you can kind of see where people are kind of pointing their fingers to and who they're looking at within there. Do you anticipate there's any potential lineup changes taking place?
I mean, I don't know that there's going to be a wholesale lineup change. I think you might, if everybody's healthy, I think you might see a little bit more Corey Trice playing the third corner role. We haven't seen that since before his injury, but he did do it a little bit earlier this season, was playing that role against the Denver Broncos. You look at a team like the Bengals with a third receiver and Andre Yoshivas, who's a big dude, another one, and Jermaine Burton, who's a real speedster. I think they have the kind of matchup that leads to that, and they haven't really done it yet. But I thought Corey was really good, like you said, against the Chiefs, and I think those slot corners have been an issue recently. And so, not really a guy on that team that I think is an obvious matchup fit for Beanie Bishop. I think Cam Sutton's been struggling, and so I think maybe that would be not necessarily a change because we have seen it earlier this season, but we haven't seen it recently, not since his injury, to go back to Corey Trice in that role.
Yeah. And now that you have everybody back on the defensive, like you were talking about with all the DBs, I was curious your perspective on if they would throw any. So we not from a personnel standpoint, but the looks that they would do now that this is the case. One, they've been struggling on the back end, but now you do have everybody back because it seems like obviously you didn't have Deshaun Elliott for 2 of those games. Then you didn't have Joey, so it's kind of been a little bit more mixing and matching. What do you expect from that standpoint?
Just the way they'll line up. I mean, I don't know. We'll see. When you're struggling to communicate, it's hard to want to be aggressive and multiple and disguise and all those things that you kind of have in the bag. I would guess that they will try to simplify things as much as they can and do the things they're trying to do right before they try to do some crazy stuff. Also, with this being a game that win or lose, they are going to the postseason. If they have something new up their sleeve, there may be a hesitancy to not want to put it on tape, to say hey, let's communicate right. And if the Bengals beat us by doing this, this, and this, we'll know that we have the answer for that, but we're going to hold that in our pocket for right now. Schematically, because they haven't been being beaten schematically. They've been beaten by mistakes. And so if they clean the mistakes up, but they lose schematically, I feel like that's a win.
I want to turn the attention to, unless you have anything more from the defensive side, because I wanted to turn my attention to what Tomlin had to say about the offense, because I was curious. In the past, we've seen him very much. They prioritize. I mean, every team does not turn the football over, right? But that's how many times does Tomlin harp on that when talking about the quarterback position specifically. So I was curious what he would have to say about Russ and the way they've been turning the football over as of late. What can you say about that?
Yeah, I was a little surprised at how forcefully Mike Tomlin kind of was critical of Russell Wilson. Was asked about whether George Pickens running out that route on the interception influenced the play, and he said 0. I don't think it was 0. I don't want to put most of the blame on George, but I don't think it was 0. Clearly, Russ was expecting him to do something different than he did. Regardless of who was at fault, it mattered a little bit. I agree that primarily Russ can't throw that ball in that situation, as I've said repeatedly. But and then was asked, started his whole press conference with 2 minutes about turnovers, just offensive and defensive, and why they haven't been coming the last 2 weeks on defense, and they've been coming too oftenly the last 2 weeks on offense, and how that's been the biggest part of what's been going wrong with this team. And then was asked later in his press conference, what can they do to improve on offense? And he literally only said, take care of the football. That is the only thing he wants. And so I think that is the most pointedly critical of Russell Wilson we've seen Mike Tomlin be. And man, we've known that there's a way to get if there's a way to get Mike Tomlin mad at you as an offensive player, it is absolutely turn the ball over.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, we mentioned stuff with getting on the same page from a defensive standpoint. Was there any of that conversation though offensively? I know that you said that he rejected giving any blame to George Pickens on that, but if he were to, you could say there's maybe a lack of communication there in terms of what George was going to do, what Russ thought he was going to do. So I'm just curious from an offensive side of things, if there's like that at play as well, or like the aims seem to be pointed directly at Russ from his perspective on that.
I mean, I just think Russ needs to know better. And I think he does know better. And I think I don't think it's communication, but I think it is a little bit of hero ball. Like, I think Russ felt the pressure to make some plays in these last couple games that maybe given based on the opponent, that he felt like he had to make those plays for the Steelers to win. But he hasn't played like that most of the year. And I think that was a problem.
Do you think because of that, that is why, like you said, it hasn't happened for most of the year, why there should be some level of, I don't know if comfort's the right word, but like that we are going to be able to get back to this. Like we've seen it for most of the year. Whatever happened in the last 3 weeks was kind of what we haven't seen for the majority. So we should feel confident, I guess that's the word, that they're going to get back to what we saw before these 3 weeks.
Yeah, I don't see any reason for the smaller but more recent thing to continue over the longer but less recent thing. Like it might, but I don't think we should think that. I think they'll probably get back to taking care of the football, especially because the Bengals defense stinks. And I think we'll have to my expectation is that we're going to come out of this game thinking, oh wow, that was much better for the Steelers offense, but really how much does it mean because of how bad, like it's one of these tests that you can't really pass because you can't really fail, right? And so I don't know that we're gonna learn about the answer to this question until we get in the playoffs. Like I don't think we find the answer to that this week.
Well, that's what's interesting is because I mentioned I thought like Cincinnati's probably the best test from a passing standpoint defensively to figure out, if some of these issues have been fixed or mitigated. Probably right, because you're not going to hold the Cincinnati passing offense completely down. But from a Steelers offense perspective, I think it's also just like a get right spot potentially for them in this one. Now, has Cincinnati been maybe a little bit better than they were the last time that these two teams met? Maybe, but they couldn't have been worse. So I'm curious to see if that comes to fruition too. The time off, obviously. I know George played last week, but now having 10 days in between games to even get more healthy for this passing group. Yeah, I just feel like this is a spot where, again, you're saying it's kind of like a lose-lose because if they do well, it was just Cincinnati and they have the worst defense, and if they don't do well, it's just a continuation of the last 3 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, this hot stretch that the Bengals are on involved giving up 27 points to the Tennessee Titans and 20 points to Cooper Rush and the Dallas Cowboys. So, like,
yeah,
people will be losing their minds if the Steelers did that. I just want to go way off track here. You mentioned about George coming back in this game.
Yeah,
that just made something popped in my head that I don't think we've talked about yet. Mike Tomlin obviously defending George Pickens there, saying it wasn't his fault that he ran the wrong route. Have you noticed that his load has not needed to be managed lately? That even coming off an injury on a short week, that George Pickens was able to play 91% of the team's offensive snaps.
Yeah.
It's just, man, it's funny how that works.
When you would think he would need to have his load managed.
Such an issue earlier in the season that he was getting tired and playing too much. But he definitely was not benched then. That's definitely not what happened at all.
Load management.
And now flying in the face of conventional logic with George coming off an injury, it's just throwing that book out the window. It's done. No longer necessary.
Load management week 5. So October, healthy, but doesn't need it. Coming off a hamstring injury, grade 2 in December, cold weather.
On a short week.
The other thing, I guess, I don't know, I guess George was dealing with a little bit of a thumb thing too during that period, which they feel like is pretty much fully healthy now. I don't know if you know anything about that, but like over the last, okay, well, yeah, all right. Well, I was told he was also dealing with a thumb thing, but they feel good about where that's at now too. I also don't know which hand it was on. So just throwing that out there. Didn't know if you could shed any light on it, but apparently not.
I don't know. It just that was always very funny to me that was the tale that was told, and how many people bought it undiscerningly.
Yeah. I want to ask you about obviously some of the conversations with the players, but I didn't know if there was more stuff from Tomlin that you felt worth talking about. Obviously, talked about getting players on the same page, the turnovers, letting the locker room kind of dictate the locker room and stuff like that. Was there anything else that came out of Tomlin today?
I think we got to most of it.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we got to almost everything here. I don't
anything
see
that was compelling.
Yeah, no, he was asked about Cam Sutton versus Beanie Bishop and kind of gave a non-answer. I think that's pretty much
okay.
it.
Well, okay, so two of the players that you talked to would have been two of the guys in that defensive meeting, Patrick Queen, Alex Highsmith. Curious what they had to say. I mean, a lot of PQ because of what he had to say post game, obviously. Curious as to what he had to say today.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was I don't want to say that those guys screwed up because they were just speaking how they feel, but I think there was some regret about the way things were characterized after the game. And I think there was a concerted effort to kind of clear up a narrative that I'm not sure ever really existed, that there was there's one bad guy on this defense that people are talking about. I'm I don't think it was ever a bad guy thing. I think it was the message is not getting through and we're getting frustrated by that thing. And so I think there's some clarity in the messaging now. I don't know if that's going to last, but right now I think they feel like that feels cleared up.
Okay. And from Alex Highsmith's perspective, it's interesting for him, right? Because he's not necessarily within the he's rushing the quarterback more often than not. He actually drops in coverage from time to time. By the way, I mean, he's super underrated in terms of what he can do in coverage when asked to do anything there. But I was curious as to his perspective because I think it's different for him as opposed to an off-ball linebacker or one of the defensive backs.
Yeah, I mean, I think for him, I really asked him pointedly about kind of what we've talked about on here about how the hard part is not solving the X's and O's. It is keeping the emotions of losing from overflowing. And I think that's really Alex's wheelhouse because he's such a steady Eddie guy, doesn't really get too I mean, that the post game press conference with Alex Highsmith where he talked about guys 1-2 is the most emotionally charged thing I've ever heard from him. And today was right back to the steady Eddie. It was just right back to hey, and I asked him very directly about that process of not letting the emotions get to you. And he said we just can't be engulfed by them. We can't stop working because we're mad about losing. It's you have to separate the two things. It seems like they're doing that. That doesn't mean the funny thing about all this is you can go into this process and say, here's what we shouldn't do. Here's what we should do. Here's how we have to fix this. Here's how here's this pitfall to avoid. And you can do it all right and then still go screw up in some other way and lose. So you can't really prove it until you play. And even if you play, you may prove it and then something else happens that I think football is it's why football is such a great sport to me is that there are no real answers. It's all just reacting to what happens in the situation. So somebody was arguing with me on Twitter today and they were what would be a successful season for the Steelers? I was I don't know. It depends on what happens. They go into a playoff game and TJ Watt and Cam Hayward collide with each other and break both their legs in the first quarter and they lose. I'm not going to feel worse about the team having had some random bad stuff happen to it. It's a sport with a single elimination postseason with a whole heck of a lot of randomness. They're already better than I thought they'd be in the regular season. You can do things right the right way most of the time and still not have things work out for you. So just because I think they're doing things the right way doesn't mean that they're going to be back this week against the Bengals, and it doesn't mean that they're going to lose it. It's just a prerequisite. If you get yourself out of your own head, you're probably not going to
Okay, if that happened, by the way, I would feel worse about the team just because of like what's going on. Like there's got to be some bad juju going on if something like that happened. But it's like every time that this team makes the postseason, it seems like there's something like TJ didn't play in the playoff game last year. Would it have mattered? No. But it's just there seems to be some type of injury towards the end of every season that's like a major one. You look back even like during the Killer B eras, like
AB and Bell like only ever played one playoff game together or something like that. Like,
yeah. So it's very random. The last thing that I wanted to bring up, I don't know if anything came of it, but you mentioned that you also talked to Mason McCormick today. It's funny because like we spent so much time talking about the defense and stuff like that. You talked about defensive players, and then it's just like Mason McCormick kind of sandwiched in there. So I'm curious what was that conversation was like.
I wasn't in it the whole time. I did ask him the question that we got asked the other day about the rookie wall thing, and he said he feels like they've put him in a good spot. He feels really good physically, and then he also kind of said like he's sort of used to this process because in the FCS they've had the playoffs, so he's kind of gone through this. Obviously not at the same level, but like it's not like he's breaking new ground in terms of the way you have to prepare on a week-to-week basis, not knowing what the schedule is going to be, not knowing who your opponent's going to be, whether there might be travel or whether there won't be travel. He's kind of done all that at a level that most FBS players haven't done. So I thought that was an interesting piece of insight from him just to say like, yeah, like, hey, I've kind of done some of this stuff. It's not like this is all totally new to me. Obviously, he's still playing more football than he's ever played in a season in his life. And I'm curious to see if the physical toll of it will continue to be something he's able to manage. But Tomlin, I also asked him about them, and he gave him a pretty full-throated vote of confidence for where they are at this point in their rookie and first full season as starters for both of those guys.
Yeah, and it's just, I mean, you never know how the schedule is going to shake out, right? But now they've had like another like mini bye basically before playing this game, and they're going to have an extra day before playing the playoff game. So maybe that it wouldn't hurt, I guess, is what I'm saying. Is the way that since that Chiefs game has taken place, I'm curious to see if they do bounce back, because you could say rookie wall because of where we were at in the season, but you could also say, well, look at the level of competition over the last couple. Now, not so much Kansas City, even though they did get 5 sacks, but certainly the Philly and Baltimore fronts.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I mean, I think it all goes hand in hand. Like we talked about Russ, like kind of running into some of those on his own. Like I just feel like I'm not going to judge this offensive line too harshly, no matter what happens down the stretch here. But it would be really encouraging if we saw them play their best football at the end of the season.
Oh, sure.
For like projection purposes, right? Like, like I made the talking on Morning Rush earlier this year, I made this sort of metaphor of like drafting offensive linemen is like planting trees. Like it takes time. You don't have them just because you have them, right? Like, but I think them being better at the end of the season than they were at the beginning of it would be pretty big. And I think Broderick Jones very quietly has been playing a lot better. Like nobody's really talked about it, but he went from being like kind of a standout, like their worst offensive lineman, to like one of their better ones over the course of the season. And really nobody's mentioned that. I love people love to pile on the offensive linemen when they're not playing well. And I think McCormick and Frazier have been better earlier than they have been the last couple of weeks. But 77's been doing all right.
And I mean, at least last week against Kansas City certainly had the toughest matchup of them without Chris Jones going against George Karlaftis. I mean, that would have been the toughest matchup along that KC front. So, yeah, I mean, I agree with you. We'll see how it shakes out. That's real quick. I know somebody just asked me about this recently. I know that like he's not going to step into a starting role. Chance, you believe, to get Troy Fautanu back in some capacity for the playoffs, or haven't really heard anything about it?
It doesn't seem like there's a lot of optimism for that right now.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess something to keep on if there's anything that changes there, but I wanted to get that because somebody did DM me asking about that. So, all right, Alan, you know the drill. Before we got here, tell people where they can find you.
At @Saunders_PGH on X, Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky PGH. Steelers Now is the site's account. SteelersNow.com. Go there, read the words so I can get paid. Like, subscribe, hit that bell for notifications here on the YouTube channel so that you don't miss an episode of Afternoon Drive, Morning Rush. Just by the way, if you did not watch Steelers Morning Rush this morning, I talked about Kenny Pickett. I knew that it was going to get a reaction. I was not sure that it was going to get the reaction that it did. As we sit here, about 7 or so hours after, it has like 90 comments already. even if you don't want to listen to what I had to say about Kenny Pickett, just reading the comments is entertaining as heck. So go check that out. And then, don't miss an episode by subscribing. And then you'll know, and you can get yours first and up top in front of the 90 commenting horde that comes after you.
There we go. Also, if you're listening somewhere else, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast from, be sure to leave a 5-star review and subscribe over there. Just search Steelers Afternoon Drive. Curious how your show this morning did on audio platforms. I would imagine not quite as good as on the YouTube because of the algorithm with everybody commenting. But maybe we got a bunch of reviews that are specifically referring to that episode. But also,
sure people aren't going to be very happy with the episode in general because
Yeah. I mean, if my mentions are anything like what those comments were after I posted a clip yesterday, just kind of, I thought it was funny. There's a clip that I know that somebody made contact with Kenny's wrist on that play where he just ends up trying to protect the ball and goes to the ground. Yeah, I made a joke because in the clip, you couldn't really tell from that angle. And I said, great play here from John Cena to take down Kenny Pickett because it looked like he just got sacked by nobody. And of course, I had the horde coming after me, probably a lot of the people that were in the comments today. But anyways, also hit us up on TikTok, Steelers Afternoon Drive, and then find me everywhere to hate tweet me at Zachary Smith PGH. For Alan Saunders and myself, thanks for jumping in, take another ride on the Steelers Afternoon Drive.